Welcome to the Uncommon CEO podcast, where we unpack the mindset, skills, and wisdom it takes to become an uncommon leader in a common world. With your host, the Uncommon CEO himself, Andrew Smart.
Welcome to the Uncommon CEO podcast. I'm here with Andrew Smart. How you doing, Andrew?
Doing fantastic. How about yourself, Matt?
Not too bad. Over the weekend, we had my wife's grandmother turned 102, which I think the conversation around the dinner table, we went up to Charlotte to celebrate with her. And the conversation was, how do you get to 102? Like, what do you got to be doing with your life to live that long? Some people it's just dumb luck. Some people it's something more.
Genetics
It probably has a lot to do with it, sure. But it's not. It can't be just genetics.
Staying away from a lot of bad stuff, too.
Probably a lot more of that. I was saying I'm taking active steps right now as I had an old fashioned in my hand to try to avoid getting to 102, just jestfully, of course. But still.
Well, Matt, do you want a long life, or do you want an enjoyable life?
That's, I think, what we were kind of talking to each other about. I don't want to die either, so I guess it's a balancing act to it for sure.
Well, you're right, but here's the deal: you're going to die no matter what. That's
true.
A guarantee. The real statement to that is you're going to die no matter what. The question is, are you going to live? And then it's kind of really defining what does live mean. Okay, that because everybody does die, but not everyone doesn't live.
Mm-hmm.
Good friend of mine, he's a doctor. He's a high risk pregnancy specialist. Actually, one of the top in the country. Used to be on the faculty with Duke. He told me one time, he and I were working out together one time,
Mm-hmm.
and his name's Phil. And Phil was like, you really don't want to really live. He was talking about as a male, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Too much past 80 because, you start getting up there, prostate goes, the other things don't work. He goes, and he was kind of joking with me, talking about, he said, basically when a male starts hitting in his 80s, it all starts going really downhill from that point.
You just fall apart at that point.
It's kind of what he was saying. He said, what you really want to do is keep a healthy life and an effective life. But, that's a great thing to have someone in your family who has hung around for that long. I've had that in my family as well on my mother's side. Amazing. They're all women.
Mm-hmm.
I made a joke before. It says, because that's y'all suck the life out of us, and y'all just keep it.
Yeah.
So I don't think that I'll make 102.
I'm pretty sure I won't.
I hope to live to an age. Lord willing, that is, older. I definitely hope to outlive my dad and how long my dad lived.
Mm-hmm.
But what I more importantly want to do is I want to live a life where I've lived my life to be effective. And I just went to a funeral yesterday. Well, really in the funeral. He died a week before that. But it was kind of
like a memorial.
That's what it was, a memorial of one of the major mentors in my life. And this guy lived to be 86, and I couldn't believe that he lived to be 86.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And because he went by the name Moose. His name was Morris Keller, but he went by Moose. He was a big guy, had the biggest hands on any man I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. You get a nickname like Moose when that happens.
He was. So. But you got to imagine, this guy huge guy. He's 86, so you can imagine him growing up in the 50s and early 60s, 6'2", 6'3", but I was a huge guy.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, his hands were massive. Even like when I went and saw him, about 2 weeks before he died, and he's in a frail state. And I'm still looking at his hands, and I'm like, his hands are massive. And so this is his frail state. Yeah. Man loved to eat, though.
Mm-hmm.
Man loved to eat. He loved food. I heard it stated in the memorial that when he ever mapped out wherever he needed to go store, he referenced restaurants.
Yeah, so, I probably do the same. I can't blame the guy.
And so, but he lived in that mindset that I just mentioned. He lived until he died, and he didn't get it confused.
Mm-hmm.
He lived a very intentional purpose life, and he made a tremendous impact on life. I said this when before he died. I said it to my best friend who knew him. And I said, Moose won't die a wealthy man on this earth, but he will die an extremely wealthy man because of all the people he impacted, of all the people that he cared about, and all the intentional time that he took for others. And that to me was just the spirit of the memorial. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And so his wife actually had died 6 months earlier. So it didn't really surprise me that he wasn't here for much longer.
They tend to go hand in hand.
Yeah. And he adored her. I mean, she was a tiny little thing too. Here's this giant guy. She was tiny. And he was his personality, I mean, being a big guy, that he'd vocalize and speak, but if she spoke, she knew how to shut him up.
Sure.
So, but a beautiful, beautiful story, a beautiful legacy, and truly impacted my life and so many others. And there were some great, great moments within the memorial where we all could collectively say some of the common things together of how Moose impacted our lives and how his intentionality towards everyone and his habits towards everyone, were consistent and the same. I mean, when I spent time with him at a younger age, when I was at Clemson and his mentoring me, we'd spend a whole summer, and he was just like, he gave me a gun. He gave me all kinds. He just give me things. I mean, and but that was his heart and that was his spirit. And so, so it was a great weekend just having that moment to reflect and celebrate. And for my faith, I look forward to seeing him again sometime.
That's great.
Yeah. What I wanted to talk about, Matt, is is really about success. And here was that your aunt you were mentioning, the 102?
No, great grandma.
Great grandma. Great grandma. Okay, great grandma, 102. That life of longevity, she's been successful to be able to live, a life at 102. And so we would call that a successful deal. If you can cross over that century mark, that's successful. So there has to be a pattern and process of things that she did within her life that had allowed her to reach that. I mean, I doubt it was just blind luck.
No, had to take I know at one point they had to give her a pacemaker to make her heart go faster because it was beating at 28 beats a minute, which is
28 beats a minute.
Had to double the speed to keep
oh
her
my
ticking.
Lord.
Yeah.
Well, see, that's why, honestly, that's why you and I are going to go out faster, because our heart has to beat too fast, so it's going to wear out.
Unfortunately,
so now you're starting to help me understand why she's living so long, because her heart hadn't had to work that hard.
Oh yeah, that thing was still like a new car. So yeah.
So, tell me just a couple of things that you love about her.
Well, I've known her for a little while. It's on my wife's side, so I didn't grow up with her or anything, but she always, was very.
So Matt, that's not your genetics.
I know. Yeah, mine lasted. They all lived into their 80s, so I've got some okay genetics, but yeah, not the Rolls Royce of genetics. But no, she's, she was, kind, and she always was generous, and just liked to be around other people, or is all of those things, not was.
Got it. Well, like I said, that's a successful life. But what I wanted to talk about today is dive into successful people and what separates them. Now, we've talked a lot about mind work, and we've talked about habits before, but what I really want to talk about is what separates the habits and the mindset of successful people. And I think to kick this off is to really think about habits. What are the habits of people who are successful? Why are successful people different? Why, when we put down a list of, if you and I had to write down a list today and qualify and quantify the successful people that you and I would list out, what are the similarities that all these people have, because I've studied a lot of successful people, highly successful people, and I come back to they all encompass these similar patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at successful people and you think about their habits, what do you think their out the gate habit is?
Well, I think intentionality is one that plays a big part in success, is that, you're doing things with purpose at all times, and you're not just making decisions based on a whim. I certainly think optimism and generosity are a big part of successful people.
Well, let's hang right there.
Yeah.
You started out with intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You have a word for the year?
I did not do that.
You're not very intentional on this, man.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah. So there's always an opportunity. It's still early in the year.
Mm-hmm.
You got opportunities here now. And the point of intentionality, okay, is that, that nothing just happens.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that anything great and people who are successful, they don't just wake up and it just happens. They recognize from an early state, okay, they've got to take a different mindset to making it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of us have desires to make things happen. All of us wake up every day with good intentions. And here's the worst part about it is the graveyard is full of good intentions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just full of it. So successful people are very intentional. And that's how they begin their day. But more importantly, they plan it the evening before.
Mm-hmm.
They know the evening before they go into their next day that they plan this. Being intentional is all about planning, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that it's like, do successful people fail? We've made that statement before. We said they fail a lot. They fail often, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when they are planning, when they plan their life, do they go, well, we're going to plan to fail, right? They don't do that.
Mm-hmm. They plan for success, but it doesn't always. You can't control everything,
But you can control this. You can control whether you're going to make a plan, and you can control whether you're going to fine tune that plan every day, every evening, and every night before you set out the day. Because if you go into that next day and you have no plan, what's that day going to look like?
you're not going to get anything accomplished.
Or you're not going to accomplish at the level that you're capable of accomplishing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guilty of it. You're guilty of it. We're all guilty of it. But what highly successful people do is they got goals. Okay, we talked about it, setting out the year. We got goals. We got strategy. We're laying out the plan. Okay, you put a plan in place, and then you're fine tuning that plan. They have goals. I mean, here's the deal. If you've got no written goals, what kind of goals do you have?
You don't really have goals. They're loose. They're ineffective goals.
So if I go into a meeting tomorrow, with you and the rest of the team, and I say, all right, everybody give me their list of goals. How many of people are going to be able to hand me their list of goals?
Well, I have a performance objective sheet it's been working on over the past couple of weeks, so I know everybody on my team will be able to, but I'm with you. For the most part, most people have.
Everyone has a performance objective sheet, but why do they have that? Because here's an organization, one of our major goals in 2022 was to make sure that we did a better job in that arena.
Mm-hmm.
That we laid out performance objectives, key measures, all those kind of things. That was an overall goal. And what are we doing in 2023?
Yeah.
To fine tune and improve on that goal. What I made a point was last year, I said, hey, we set out in 2022 to put these objectives in place. But in 23, we need to fine tune that. But if I take it a step further and say, hey, hand me your goals or show me your goals, I think some people could do it, and I think other people would waffle.
Mm-hmm.
Because then they look at me like this, and they go, well, does he want our business goals? Does he want our personal goals?
Mm-hmm.
They fucking go hand in hand.
You should. You can't be better unless you're working on yourself.
Correct. I mean, that it fascinates me. Fascinates me that I see people who they can chart out all their business goals. And then if I ever ask them, okay, great, what are you personally working on?
Mm-hmm.
And they look at you like freaking the Homer Simpson blinking eyes.
Mm. Yep.
I'm like, so you're telling me that you are going to be the best you can be in this arena that I actually need you and everybody else needs, but you've got no personal goals that coincide these goals? How the hell does that work?
And they don't even have to be interrelated to each other, but they'll naturally support each other. If you have personal goals to work on your mind, work on your health, etc., it's going to impact your professional goals just by proxy.
Because if you got no goals for self-improvement, there's no way that you can totally maximize improvement in all these other areas.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So highly successful people, they make these goals, they review their goals daily, and that's something that I'm working on. Look, I can tell you, I am my biggest critic, and I have no problem, laying out, okay, all the areas of improvement that I continue to work on and areas that I have not been as good on. I've always been an optimistic guy. I've always been a forward-thinking guy. I've always been a guy who wants to do deep work on whether it's discipline or how to improve in life. One of the areas that I'm better at today, a lot better in today, was working on a cadence in my schedule. I used to get, there was a guy who, I don't bring up his name, he was overboard in his agenda.
Mm-hmm.
He had a little book that I used to say, man, you got like murderer's handwriting right there. You just kind of like, that. I mean, he was over the top in how he had everything scheduled. Now, I do personally believe maybe you can go a little too far.
Mm-hmm.
And because, everything, I said, did you schedule yourself to pee?
Yeah, he might have.
I mean, like you said, everything was freaking scheduled. And I'm like, man, I don't want to be there, but I recognize how important it is to have a schedule because I was probably too much on the other side. And now I'm working to be better in discipline of schedule and setting intentional time to make things happen that I want to happen so I can lay out these goals more, effective that I want to have. So they make a list, they prioritize. I will tell you from every guru I've ever studied to myself, and I'm wired the same way. Successful people have very strong morning routines.
Mm-hmm.
Very strong morning routines. Now, my morning routine is consistent. It's been it's consistent for as long as I can remember, decades. I'm a up early in the morning, want to hit the gym first thing in the morning. Why do I want to hit the gym first thing in the morning? Because, I've trained my mind that from an athlete side of things that, this is the best time to do it. I think there's so many things, not just from the mind, but to the body of it's better to work out on an empty stomach. It's better to do all it. But really, I've trained my mind to get it done then. Because if I don't get it done then, it is harder to get it done at any other point in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a successful person and you're building towards success, once your day gets going, it's hard to find those gap times to get that in. So you want to make that a priority of, those morning routines. Now, for me, it's exercise. Some people, it's different things. Some people all right, I'm starting my morning off. I've said this, there's so much research on it that we should never start our morning off reading emails, computers, all that. The data is clear. It's absolutely clear. We are a slave to these type of things. Mm-hmm. You and I, in our generation, we got integrated to this way of life. We didn't grow up with those tools.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk about being a slave to it, now, as generations growing up, that's what they know. That's all they know.
Yeah, it's Instagram notifications in the morning.
That's it. And that's, so they're wired. These people are very smart. Why do you think they have all the sound mechanisms that go off to, whether it's a text message, whether it's some type of news information, our brains become wired to that. But highly successful people recognize, okay, get your morning routine level setting your mind.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much research on how important light is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we talk. Many people talk a lot about the bad light that can be in your home, blue
Sure.
lights and stuff like that. How important sunlight is, and so that many people who don't get up in the morning and just get a dose of sunlight.
True.
And that's important to be effective for overall health, but definitely for mental health. And so, I mean, when I wake up in the morning and I see that sun coming up, it does a lot for my mind and soul. Man, there's just something. One, it's beautiful to see, but two, there's an invigorating part of your mind and soul of that sun.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so having morning set consistent routines that help you become more effective. This is what highly successful people do. And here's the other part. They don't sleep in, they get up early. I think it's hard to be highly successful if you're the person who lives on the snooze.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I personally, there are people who will love to argue this, and they're all the people who love to stay up late.
Sure.
And so, I mean, people love to stay away. They will justify, and they have to, because I've had them many times tell me, but I've just always been of a believer of getting up early.
Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise.
I've just been a big believer in that you put that block of time, you put that rest, and then get your day going early.
Mm-hmm.
So highly successful people get that. They also understand the value of the body. Okay, so they got this mind, they got this routine, they understand setting their goals, but they treat their body well, so they fuel their body well, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think very highly successful people, we all like them, understand it, set out every morning and say, I can't wait to get down to Krispy Kreme.
Yeah, the Doritos throughout the day probably doesn't overlap with extremely successful folks.
Have you had any pizza this year?
Not too much, a little bit.
I didn't say if you had too much. I said if you had any.
Yeah, I've had some.
Okay. Was it good?
It was my favorite. I love
Since you've been doing keto, still doing keto?
Yeah.
Since you've been doing keto, how'd you feel after having pizza?
Well, I'm that obnoxious person at the restaurant that basically had the toppings of the pizza. Or there's a keto-friendly pizza at this place right up the street that makes it with like flaxseed and all this stuff. So,
You have to tell me about that one.
Yep.
I've tried
Blaze pizza. Mm-hmm.
Blaze. I eat Blaze pizza all the time.
Yeah, they have a keto on there.
Yeah. Well, I get the cauliflower one they do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess that's
They have one more past that. Mm-hmm.
Good information.
Yes,
Appreciate
indeed.
sharing.
That's why we're doing the podcast.
So, fueling your body, putting the right things in your body. When you eat right, you do things right, you feel better. And then feeding your mind. Okay, what are we putting in our mind? Okay, we go through our daily cadence of information that we're putting in our mind. All the information from work, all the things we're doing that. But what are we doing to add continued value? What are we reading? And I emphasize reading, because reading is something that all of us, if we want to be highly effective, and if you're Bill Gates, if you're Doug McMillon, CEO of Walmart, I look at their reading list every year. Mm-hmm. Every year they're going to post on LinkedIn, here's what I read. I always look at, highly successful people, and they always show what they read. So I want to say, hey, did I read anything that they read? Many times I have. But highly successful people intentionally take time to read. And that's fueling your mind. One that I'll say here, and I know that you're very good at this, highly successful people take very intentional time with family.
Absolutely. If you only have a certain amount of hours that you can be together, be present, make it count.
I've always been intentional on that. So from being an entrepreneur at a young age, in your 20s, you're not an entrepreneur. I didn't have children at that age, so it was really just a wife and I. So and she was working hard. So during the week we were so just busy But I worked hard to never bring work home on the weekend. And I've lived by, that really that mindset to not ever do that. That I have, if I ever give myself a high five on something I've been very good at, is to not ever really bring much work home.
Mm-hmm.
And if I ever did, it was on a critical issue that had to be handled, but it was rare. And that way that when I'm with family time, that they're not being taken away with my mind focused on work. That I can be with the family, I can do that kind of stuff, I can be with my kids, that they're not competing against whatever I got on my work schedule. And it's worked well for me that way. I know that's different people struggle in that arena. But for me, that was important to be able to be intentional, to take that time with family, because I think quality and volume are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm all about quality. And I've said this about my own life. My dad worked a lot. I mean, a lot of hours, running the restaurant, 6 days a week. He worked a lot of hours. But when he spent time with me, it was very intentional time. And so I never grew up with, man, Dad just never spent much time with me.
Mm-hmm.
I always think about the great times we did spend together.
Sure.
And so for me, it's about quality time versus quantity of time. Values. I think when you look at, successful people, they have a strong set of values. That they have a set of values that they live by and stick by, that I think that you can look at them from across the board, that they're all very similar, that they look at values being important. What is my level in values? What is my level in integrity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so values are so important. When I think you look at people, and if you're ever looking at someone that, that you might put into that category of successful, I think you're always going to look at, okay, they're successful, but what do they really value? When we look at highly successful people, we don't just look at them from one measurement of finance. I think if that's the only thing that we measure people by, that's a terrible measurement.
Sure. There's lots of rich people that
don't have good values.
Yeah. Lots. Yeah.
And so, values.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the deal. Highly successful, highly wealthy people, highly, committed people at that level, I think across the board tend to have good values, because they want to share, they want to, care, they give back. I mean, good values. And they practice a mindset of gratitude. And gratitude was one of my words for the year, and understand the power of gratitude. And when you see highly successful people, they always are grateful for where they're at. And they recognize that all the things that they've gone through to get there, and they realize that no one's self-made.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're grateful. And I think gratitude is something that they practice, and they take gratitude and share, and that is a true mindset of highly successful people. Here's another one, interesting one. We all hear the word multitask.
Sure.
And so I've made this point many times when I've heard people say, well, I'm handling a bunch of stuff, I'm multitasking a bunch of items. And I go to them, I said, well, okay, you're multitasking a bunch of items, but how effective are you in them?
Mm-hmm. It's like the jack of all trades, master of none.
Well, I don't think that you can be good at anything in a multitask mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't give 100% to anything.
Yeah, it's all about focus.
Yeah, I mean, highly successful people. I guess you put Jeff Bezos in a category.
He's done pretty well for
probably
himself,
highly successful,
money wise.
I mean, he's giving back. I mean, but if you had to put him on that, I listened to him one time in a talk about that really successful people, highly successful people, they really, and in leadership, they really kind of focus on three things, meaning that they'll put their emphasis on every year 3 certain things. And that's where they drive. So they're not distracted by a bunch of different things. They're really honed in on 3 particular areas. And I guess that's kind of where he operates in his life, where I got 3 core objectives. This is where I'm operating in my life, and this is where I'm going to stay. I'm not going to get sidetracked on a bunch of different deals. So I think that I understand what he was trying to say is like, look, I can be highly effective if I put my emphasis here in these 3 areas. But if you bring me 10, 20, 30, 40, I can't be highly effective. And so that's where multitasking, is where they remove. And that's part of them also realizing that to be highly effective and successful, you got to get distractions out of your life. And I think distractions are hard for people because too often we don't recognize what's a distraction. I think, we can say, hey, that person who's annoying can be distracting. We think, I've got something on my diet that's keeping me from achieving. That's distracting. But I think there are things in our life that we have in there that are very distracting and that we don't put them in that distracting category.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it's relationships.
Sure.
That we have relationships in our life that are very distracting. It goes back to what I talked about, in the Pareto principle that, that usually we have about this 20% of something that's distracting, and taking that 80% of our energy. And highly successful people are very great at identifying what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And when they identify it, they do something about it, whether it's eliminating it or doing something to keep that from happening. Worked a lot to get better in that arena, a lot. And I'm much better today than I have been in my past. And so watching out for those distractions. And it could be things that you enjoy. I mean, sometimes things we enjoy are distractions. I mean, maybe we spend too much time in football, Matt. Sometimes we spend too much time in sports. I mean, there's different things that can be distracting.
Yeah, Netflix asks you if you're still watching. That's how you know you've been distracted. Yeah.
Amazing. Highly successful people learn from others, and they love to learn from others. I love to learn from others.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm constantly like a sponge wanting to learn from others and from all walks of life, constantly learning. Always looking, for new ideas, new, thoughts. I love learning. That when I shared with you before about that mentor who passed away, that was one thing that they also talked about at his funeral, about how he just loved to learn. I think, we have a creator that intentionally created our mind to value learning. I mean, what's the old Einstein statement that that they said he only used like 10% of his brain?
That's wild.
And so if Einstein only used 10% of his brain, that means there's a lot more that can be used. And we can constantly learn. So I think learning is, we learn from the moment we're born, and we should be learning to the moment we die. Constantly learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I always want to be a learner. The final point of what highly successful people understand and they get, that in this life, you don't always have to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
You don't always have to wake up every day and say, God, I got to have the idea that nobody ever came up with, that I can take all these things that many people throughout time have done and just take these tools and apply them to my life and where I want to go and what I want to do, and then fine tune them to help me be what I believe I can be. Because we'll go back to the beginning deal. First, a highly successful person believes in themselves, and they believe what they're capable of, and they begin these actions. But, constantly, fine tuning towards that. And so any highly successful people you find, while they're all different in their own different ways, they all encompass this same group of thinking. They all have this group. And when you see that group of highly successful people, you will see that. And when you see people who aren't highly successful, you'll see a whole different group of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where highly successful people think, and that's what separates them from the crowd.
Is there any big takeaway, or even going back to you said Bezos does 3 things. What 3 things are you doing right now?
For this year, my word was discipline.
Mm-hmm.
So there were areas in my life, when we talk about, it's easy to talk about physical discipline, for areas in my life, I want to be much more disciplined in my schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So schedule discipline to create a much more disciplined, intentional action towards my schedule. One of my major steps to do that was hire someone that could help me with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So highly successful people know that, hey, I need to put people in, in my network or in my group that can help me. So schedule, was important. I mean, and it has the ability to help me be that way, to be intentional towards my schedule. Because I feel like that was an area of that discipline blade that I gotten kind of a little loose on, because I wasn't surrounded by enough discipline in that arena. My previous assistant, who I loved, she helped me in so many ways, but her strength was not pressing into me on, hey, you need to be here, you need to do that. That wasn't her gift.
Mm-hmm.
She had other ones, but that wasn't her gift. The one I have now, she has no time. She has no problem telling me, it's 1:00, you need to be in the podcast.
Keep you on track, yeah.
I'm like, yes, ma'am.
True.
So it's that arena really, honed in, really working on being very intentional, working with my kids, some of their sports stuff this year. So I've been really working with them on that. And on the business front, really focused in on some of our big growth ideas. I will say, going back to this podcast, that goes right into the discipline side too.
Mm-hmm. Sure does.
That doing this podcast, has been a process of culminating over a couple of years to get this started. But it has forced me to be more disciplined, and I'm working on that discipline muscle to get better at this.
Sure.
And so, because here's the deal. I want to be successful with the Uncommon CEO. And while there are other podcasts out there, and while we live in a world today where there's a lot of podcasts,
sure.
Why? This goes to where, like, I didn't have to go recreate anything. I just took my little twist on what I wanted to take to people and share with people. But what I want to do is I want to be effective with people.
Mm-hmm.
And I want us to be able to take this podcast and be able to reach people and help people. I didn't start this podcast out to say, gosh, I can't wait to build a podcast so I can monetize a podcast and make money. No, I'm fortunate that I built a business and I have all, kind of efforts and energies going that way. And I've been successful that way. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be more successful because that's what I believe and that's who I am. But what I want this podcast to be is to help others to think differently, to help others to use and learn from experience that I'd have or things that I think about and how can they apply it to their life.
Sure.
So I want to be disciplined and I want to be successful in this podcast. And that's a process of a daily and consistent weekly improvement.
It's good to hear just ways that we can just make ourselves a little bit better every day.
Well, I appreciate it, Matt. And here's the deal. Success starts in the way you think, okay? Mm-hmm. But thinking alone doesn't get it done. You've got to take that thinking process and apply it into action. You remember, where we were talking about the subconscious mind?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, remember, when we take that conscious mind and we're putting into the daily action, so if we're daily creating those positive, focused, intentional routines, what happens in the subconscious mind?
It gets stronger, and you see results from it.
Yeah. The subconscious mind it keeps that repetitive mind moving forward. And so as we take that action every day, we're going to build a stronger subconscious mind that will help us grow to be much more effective people.
Thanks for joining us today on the Uncommon CEO podcast. Subscribe to our show wherever you get podcasts. We have video episodes on our YouTube channel and more uncommon wisdom on our social media. Find all our links and resources at uncommonceopodcast.com. For Andrew Smart and all of us here at the Uncommon CEO, stay uncommon.